that we need to take ambitious decisions to show that Europe and North America stand together in an age of global competition. And that we need to show transatlantic unity, not just in words, but also in deeds. I briefed you earlier on the foreign ministers' discussion. Defense ministers focus on plans to reinforce our unity, including with a strengthened commitment to collective defense. This means rapid and full implementation of our military adaptation and continued improvements to our readiness, our capabilities and our defense investments. Defense ministers also addressed Afghanistan. The drawdown of our forces is progressing in an orderly and coordinated way. And at every step, the safety of our personnel remains paramount. We are ending our military mission, but we are not ending our support to the Afghans. So today, defense ministers discussed the way forward. We will continue our civilian diplomatic presence in Kabul to provide advice and capacity-building support to Afghan security institutions. We will continue to provide funding to the Afghan security forces. We are also looking at how we can provide military education and training outside Afghanistan, focused on special operation forces. And we are working on how to fund the provisions of services enabling allies and the international community to stay in Kabul, including support for the airport. Ministers agreed that this continued support is the best way in which we can all contribute to peace efforts in Afghanistan. With that, I'm ready to take your questions.
And we'll start with Brooks Stigner from Jane's Defense.
I've unmuted myself. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, I have two unrelated questions, Mr. Stoltenberg. You said earlier that NATO ministers agreed to create a defense innovation accelerator, which is supported by funding from nations that decide to participate. So my question there is, how will that approach benefit those allies who do not financially participate regarding their access to any technologies developed by the accelerator? And my second question pertains to NATO's deterrence and missile defense. And here I do not refer to NATO's evolving ballistic missile defense, which we all know is geared toward threats from the south. So we don't need any explanation of that. I refer instead to NATO's missile defense against medium and long range threats and the growing arsenals of Russia and Chinese missiles. So we know the allies are mulling more common funding and that they will take stronger missile defense into consideration in the new strategic concept. So my question to you is, do you think that allies should spend more of their common funding on missile defense or not? Thank you.
First, on the technology accelerator, we need to sharpen our technological edge, and therefore, as part of NATO 2030, we are now discussing, working on how we can establish an accelerator, which will be a center that brings together allies to help them to coordinate and work together on developing technologies and also to provide some additional funding from those allies that decide to participate in the accelerator. This is important because we see that new and disruptive technologies such as autonomous systems, artificial intelligence, big data is really changing the way our militaries are going to operate in the future, and we need to maintain our technological advantage, our technological edge, as we have had for so many decades. And we also see that, for instance, China is investing heavily in these technologies, and their intent is to become the world's leading power in, for instance, artificial intelligence in the next decade. And NATO has to stay ahead of the curve, and that's the reason why we now are, as part of the NATO 2030 agenda, working on this defense accelerator as a tool to strengthen our coordination, our work on technology, and also to prevent any gaps between allies, because we need to maintain our ability to work together, interoperability, also in the age of new and more disruptive technologies. The aim is to make a decision to establish this accelerator at the summit in 2 weeks' time. Then we need to work on the exact governance structures and define the details and also location and so on this new accelerator. So it's still some important work that has to be done after the summit, but to take the decision in principle to establish the accelerator, and also to make clear that allies can opt in or out. So exactly how we will, as I say, what kind of access those allies who are not part of the accelerator have, it's too early to say, but of course they will not have the same access and not participate in exactly the same way as those allies that decide to be part of the accelerator and also then provide funding for the accelerator. I believe that many allies will actually decide to participate because they see the high value of working together, transatlantic, working with private sector, working with academia, and also supporting startups and actually pooling resources by doing this together. So for me, this is an important and very forward-looking proposal, one of the many in the NATO 2030 agenda. Then on air and missile defense. So first of all, we have the NATO capability targets, and we have agreed that we need to invest more in air and missile defense, and NATO allies are doing that. More and more allies are now investing more in new advanced systems to be able to protect and defend ourselves against different types of threats, air and missile attacks. I believe that in addition to what nations do nationally, there is also good reasons for do more together as NATO, and also use common funded budgets to invest in this, to strengthen the coordination, to develop command and control, and also improve our ability to share information and all the many aspects related to effective and coordinated air and missile defense. So again, we have some work to do, but one of the reasons why there is broad support for strengthening our defense and defense, including by investing together, is that that's an efficient way of spending money, investing money. It's strengthening our ability to work together, and air and missile defense, integrated air and missile defense over NATO territory, NATO airspace, is one example of an area where we need a national efforts, very much coordinated by the NATO capability targets, but also then supported by and further augmented by common funded investments by NATO allies.
The next question goes to Lailo Massadid from Brussels Morning.
Thank you, Oana, and good evening. As you heard, Secretary-General Australian announced the closure of their embassy in Kabul because of the security uncertainties and because of the troop withdrawal. Other embassies are in the following suit. Since the situation isn't getting better, are you concerned about this development? Thank you very much.
NATO is ending its military mission, the rescue support mission in Afghanistan, but we will continue to provide support. And we will do that in different ways. We will continue our diplomatic civilian presence in Afghanistan to provide support, capacity building advice to the Afghan security institutions. We will continue to provide funding for the Afghan security forces. And we are also now working on how we can establish out-of-country training for the Afghan forces, especially the the Special Operation Forces. And then on top of that, we are now working together with other allies, or NATO allies are working together to make sure that we can provide support to important infrastructure, to support the international community at large, other diplomatic missions, non-governmental organizations, help them to provide both civilian support, diplomatic presence, but also development aid. And one key aspect of that is the work we are doing now to provide support to continue to have a functioning airport meeting international standards in Kabul, which is of course extremely important for any diplomatic civilian presence in Afghanistan. We are fully aware of that the situation in Afghanistan is challenging, fragile, and difficult. And we are under no illusion that the way forward in Afghanistan is easy, and there are serious risks. At the same time, over now close to 2 decades, NATO allies have provided substantive support to the Afghan security forces and helped to build a professional, strong Afghan army and security force, which has proven very capable, and that has enabled us to gradually decrease our presence from more than 100,000 troops not so many years ago to, at the beginning of this year, 10,000 troops, and then we will end our military presence within a short time. But as I said, we will, in light of the challenges and in light of the uncertainty, continue to provide support, and are working on the modalities of that support as we speak.
For the next question, we'll go to Bucharest and Robert Lupito from Calea Europeană.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes. I have 2 questions, one on resilience and the other one on common funding. Romania presented today its Euro-Atlantic Resilience Center to NATO allies. How was this proposal has been seen or received by allies, considering the fact that Romania wants to use this center as a platform together for NATO allies and the EU? And on common funding, 3 weeks ago, together with President Biden, you participated to the Bucharest 9 format, where all NATO allies from the eastern flank urged once again for reinforcement measures and supplementary military measures on the eastern flank. Can we see this idea of common funding being targeted also to reinforcing NATO's position in the eastern flank? Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Of course, NATO allies decide what we use or in what we invest when we allocate our common funded budgets. Common funding has, over decades, as long as NATO has existed, been important to bind allies together, to strengthen their ability to operate together, and to invest in critical infrastructure, readiness, and exercises. And of course, all of this is relevant for also our presence in the eastern part of the alliance. And over the last years, we have increased the defense spending in NATO allied countries or across NATO, but our common funded budgets have not increased. So we believe, and there's broad consensus that we should invest more together, because this is a force multiplier, and it is an investment in binding North America and Europe together, which is the core task of NATO. By investing together, we invest more efficiently, and we can achieve more than we can do as individual allies. But of course, the vast majority of defense spending will still come in national defense budgets. But if we believe in multilateral cooperation, if we believe in the value of doing things together, of course, common funding is the glue that actually binds us together and help us also to achieve things we cannot achieve as individual allies. And then to be able to implement the plans we have to strengthen our deterrence and defense posture, common funding will be helpful to ensure full and speedy implementation. The Resilience Center, of course, that's something we welcome. NATO believes that the resilience is our first line of defense. Critical infrastructure has to be protected, it has to be resilient. And this is everything from energy grids to telecommunications, 5G, to undersea cables. And working with the EU on resilience is actually one of the areas which we have identified as an important area to work together with the EU. I discussed that with the European College when I met all the EU commissioners not so long a time ago, and also I've discussed that with the EU leadership in different formats over a long period of time. So the Resilience Center is important. The Deputy Secretary-General of NATO has already visited it, and he told me that he was very impressed and that this is really a contribution by Romania to NATO, to Europe, to EU, and the way we are working together. So we welcome this initiative, and I look forward to see the results and everything that the Centre is going to do to help all of us strengthening our work on resilience.
Okay, for the last question, we'll go to Prague, to Mustafa Sawa from Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty.
Thank you very much, Joanna. Thank you, Mr. Secretary-General. Two questions, if I may. Can the Taliban win militarily? And the second one is NATO is going to end its longest mission in Afghanistan after 20 years. Do you think that the longest war in Afghanistan that has hard hit the ordinary Afghans will come to an end by September 11? Thank you.
We have been very clear-eyed about the fact that the decision to end the military mission, to support NATO's presence in Afghanistan, entails risks. Because the situation in Afghanistan is difficult. And we see reports about violence, attacks, and also brutal violence against children in school, young girls, absolutely innocent civilians, which are victims of this meaningless violence we see again and again in Afghanistan. So we don't underestimate the challenges and the risks. At the same time, to decide to stay and continue the rescue support mission would also have entailed risks. The risks of increased violence, the increase against also, of course, the NATO troops and NATO forces, the increased risk of being forced to increase the number of troops, and also the risk of being engaged in an open-ended mission. So the reason why NATO allies made the decision we made a couple of months ago was that after 2 decades, where we have been able to actually build an Afghan security force from almost nothing to a capable, strong security force, we thought that it was the time to end the mission. But at the same time realize the risks, and therefore continue to provide support in other ways, including by out-of-country training, funding for the Afghan security forces, and our continued civilian presence in Afghanistan. and that has been also a clear message from ministers in the meeting today, that they stand by that decision to continue to provide support and also to help facilitate the continued presence of the international community, for instance, by supporting an international airport in Kabul. So all in all, no one believes that this is an easy decision, but after 2 decades, we made the decision to end our mission. The meaning was never to stay there forever, but at some stage say that now the time has come for the Afghans to be in full charge of their own future, and the only way to have a lasting peaceful solution in Afghanistan is to have an Afghan-owned and Afghan-led peace process, and that the Afghans are in full charge of their own future.
Thank you very much. This concludes this press conference and the virtual meetings of defense and foreign ministers. Thank you.
Thank you.